The desert stretched endlessly, an ocean of red dust and silence. Evelyn Hart had never seen land like this before. The air shimmered with heat, the wind dry as bone, and the sun burned through her bonnet until she thought it might set her hair aflame. The wagon train that wound through the valley below looked like a line of insects crawling across a dying world. She sat in the back of the last wagon, gripping a small leather-bound Bible, her mother's name faintly scratched inside the cover. It was the only thing she had left of her family. The rest, her father, her brothers, had been taken by war and disease long before this journey west. When she looked ahead, she saw soldiers on horseback riding parallel to the caravan, rifles glinting. They were her protection, or so she believed. The attack came like lightning, sudden, silent, and absolute. It began with a cry from the ridge, high and sharp, like an eagle's scream. Then came the thunder of hooves, the blur of paint and feathers, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The Apaches swept down from the rocks, their horses cutting through the line of wagons like a storm through wheat. Evelyn barely had time to scream. The first wagon burst into flames, arrows whistling through the air. The soldiers returned fire, shouting orders, but the desert swallowed their words. She saw men fall, faces she had spoken to that morning laughing about the heat. Now they were dust and silence. Evelyn scrambled out of the wagon, her skirts catching on a splinter of wood. She fell, hands burning on the sand. A shadow loomed over her, a man on horseback, face painted in red and black, hair braided with bone. His eyes were dark and steady, not wild like she'd imagined. In his hand he held a rifle, but he didn't raise it. She froze. Every instinct told her to run, yet her legs refused to move. Behind him the chaos continued. Cries, smoke, the sharp crack of gunfire. But in that moment she heard only her own heartbeat. The warrior looked down at her, expression unreadable. She could see that his left cheek bore a scar, running from ear to jaw, and though his body spoke of strength, his eyes held something else, something almost weary. A soldier lunged from behind, gun aimed at the Apache's back. The warrior turned with the speed of a hawk, knocking the man to the ground. A single strike of his knife ended the struggle. Evelyn gasped, stumbling backward, the hem of her dress stained crimson. When she looked up again, the Apache had dismounted and stood before her. He reached out, not roughly, but firmly, and caught her wrist. "Move," he said in accented English. The word startled her as much as his grip. She hadn't expected him to speak her language. He pulled her toward one of the waiting horses, and before she could resist, he lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle. She tried to fight him, striking at his arm, but he only tightened his hold. "Stop," he said, "or die here." Something in his tone, flat, certain, cut through her panic. She went still. Behind them the wagons burned, a black column of smoke rising into the vast blue. As they rode away, Evelyn looked back once. The soldiers were gone. The desert had swallowed everything, friends, wagons, names. Only the wind remained, carrying the scent of ash and gunpowder. Hours passed as they rode into the deepening dusk. The sun bled out behind the cliffs, painting the sky in fire. Evelyn's arms ached from holding on, but the warrior said nothing, guiding the horse with effortless grace through the maze of canyons. At last they reached a narrow ravine where the sound of running water echoed softly. He stopped, dismounted, and looked at her again. "You live," he said simply, as if it were both a promise and a sentence. Evelyn Hart, the preacher's daughter, sat trembling on a stranger's horse, her world turned to dust. In that instant she understood. She was no longer part of the world she had known. Whatever came next would be written in the language of survival, and the eyes of the man who had captured her. The night came cold and sharp. The desert, which had burned her skin all day, now bit through her dress like a blade of ice. Evelyn sat close to a small fire that popped and hissed, throwing sparks into the darkness. Around her, shadows moved. Men and women of the Apache camp, their faces half lit, their eyes flicking toward her with suspicion. She could not understand their words, but she understood their tone. She was not welcome here. Her captor, Taza, she had heard one of them call him, stood apart from the others, speaking in low, commanding tones to an older man draped in a blanket of white deer hide. The elder's hair was long and silver, his expression carved by both wisdom and sorrow. He looked at Evelyn once, his gaze deep as stone, then turned back to Taza. Their conversation grew sharp. The older man gestured toward the canyon's edge, toward freedom or death. She could not tell which. Taza's voice, calm but unyielding, cut through the murmuring. He was arguing for her life. Evelyn could sense it, though she could not understand his words. The elder finally turned away with a motion of his hand, and the circle around the fire broke apart. Taza came to her then. He crouched beside her, the firelight catching in his eyes, dark, unreadable. "You will live," he said in slow, careful English. For now. Her voice trembled, both with fear and a flicker of anger. "Why, what do you want with me?" He did not answer at once. He looked at the flames as though searching for the right words among them. "My people are hungry," he said finally. "Sick. The soldiers take our land, our water. They kill our game. They leave us to starve." His gaze met hers again, steady and unflinching. "You are worth food, medicine. They will trade for you." Evelyn's breath caught. "You mean to ransom me?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Your word." "Ransom," he repeated, tasting it like something foreign. "Yes, ransom." Her stomach turned. She looked around. The camp was larger than she had realized. A cluster of hide tents and makeshift shelters tucked into the rocks. Children huddled by the fires, their faces thin, eyes too large. Women moved among them, quiet and efficient, tending to the wounded from the day's raid. She saw one young boy coughing, his chest rattling with each breath. Something softened inside her. These were not the monsters she'd been told about in the safety of army forts and church sermons. They were people, worn, desperate, proud. Taza rose to his full height. "You will not try to run," he said. It was not a question. Evelyn met his gaze, lifting her chin despite her fear. "And if I do?" He stepped closer until she could see the faint scar that cut across his cheek. His voice was quiet, but the weight of it pressed against her like iron. "Then you die," he said. Quickly. She swallowed hard but did not look away. "And if I stay?" He hesitated. Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she could not name. Respect, perhaps, or pity. "Then you live," he said at last. With that, he turned and walked away, his shadow melting into the night. Evelyn sat motionless, staring into the fire until her vision blurred. The flames seemed to whisper to her, soft, strange sounds that mingled with the far-off howl of a coyote. She thought of home, of the wooden church in Missouri where her father had once preached about heaven's mercy. Here, in the raw silence of the desert, she wasn't sure heaven could hear her at all. When she finally lay down on the cold ground, sleep did not come easily. Every sound, the crack of firewood, the rustle of wind through brush, felt like a warning. But beneath it all, she could still hear the echo of Taza's voice. "You will live. For now." It was a promise she did not trust, yet clung to anyway, because in this strange, hostile world, even a fragile promise was something like hope. The fire burned low, its orange glow barely touching the edges of the canyon walls. Evelyn sat near its warmth, her wrists bound loosely with a strip of hide. Around her, the Apache camp murmured in quiet rhythm, men sharpening knives, women mending hides. The distant cry of a night bird carried on the wind. The sounds were foreign, yet strangely steady, like the pulse of an old world she had only just begun to glimpse. Taza sat across from her, tending to a blade by firelight. His hands were steady, movements deliberate. The weapon's edge gleamed with a cold beauty that made her throat tighten. He hadn't spoken to her since the sun went down, and though no one had harmed her, the silence itself was a kind of prison. Finally, she couldn't bear it. "Do you mean to keep me here forever?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. He did not look up. "Forever is a long time." "Then what happens to me when the soldiers come?" she pressed. "Will you trade me for food? Or kill me when you no longer need me?" At that, his hand stopped. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to hers. The fire cast shadows across his face, turning the plains of it to bronze and darkness. "If you speak of death," he said, his tone low and even, "speak softly. Death hears everything." Her pulse quickened, but she refused to drop her gaze. "You think you frighten me?" He studied her for a long moment, then gave a faint shake of his head. "No, you do not frighten easily, that is strange." Evelyn leaned forward, anger breaking through her fear. "Strange? I've lost everything. My people are dead because of you, and I'm sitting here tied like an animal. Tell me why I shouldn't be afraid." Taza's eyes narrowed, but not in rage. He seemed to be measuring her. "Because you are still alive," he said quietly. "Because if I meant you dead, you would already be beneath the sand." The word struck her harder than she expected. There was no boasting in his tone, no cruelty, only truth. Something fierce and raw in his honesty made her chest tighten. She turned her face toward the flames, blinking fast. He rose then, standing tall against the starshot sky. The firelight shimmered against the paint on his chest and arms. "You speak boldly," he said, almost to himself. "Like one who has never seen what war truly is." Evelyn let out a soft, bitter laugh. "War? I've seen it. The Union took my father. The fever took my brothers, and men with guns took the rest. I've seen enough war for one lifetime." He looked at her then, not as a prisoner, but as a mirror of something he understood. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Then you know what it makes of people. I have seen my brother kill our own. I have seen the white men burn our water and bury our dead in stone." His hand clenched briefly at his side. "Do not ask again if I will kill you. Death already walks beside us both." Something in her, a small trembling defiance, rose up then. The fear, the exhaustion, the weight of loss all pressed together into a single reckless thought. "Then if you're going to kill me," she whispered, meeting his gaze steadily, "kiss me first." The night seemed to stop breathing. The flames hissed softly, throwing sparks into the air. Taza stared at her, unmoving. For a heartbeat, his face was unreadable. Then, without a word, he stepped closer. The space between them vanished. His hand came up, not roughly but with unshakable control, resting against her jaw. His skin was warm, his breath steady. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. She didn't understand why she'd said it, only that she'd meant it. That if death was coming, she would not meet it cowering. His lips met hers. Not gently, but not cruelly either. It was a kiss of silence, of battlefields and grief, and something too deep for either of them to name. When he pulled back, his eyes were darker than before. "Be careful what fire you call," he said softly. "It may burn us both." Then he turned away, vanishing into the shadows, leaving Evelyn trembling before the dying fire, caught between fear, anger, and a strange, dangerous yearning that would not let her go. Evelyn did not sleep that night. The kiss lingered on her lips like the ghost of a flame, searing, bewildering, and utterly alive. She had thought herself brave when she'd said those words. "If you're going to kill me, kiss me first." But now, in the stillness of the desert night, her courage felt like madness. What kind of woman taunted death with a kiss? She sat near the dying fire, arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the camp settle into silence. The Apache warriors had faded into their tents or vanished into the shadows, but she could still feel him, Taza, somewhere nearby. His presence hung in the air, heavy as smoke. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him leaning over her, the glint of firelight in his eyes, the press of his hand against her jaw. It hadn't been tenderness, no, there had been something fierce, defiant, almost mournful in that kiss. It was as if he'd been trying to silence something neither of them had the words to speak. By dawn, the cold had crept into her bones. When she finally stirred, a young Apache girl, no more than 12, approached with a clay bowl of water and a piece of flatbread. She didn't speak, only set the food beside Evelyn and retreated. The girl's shy, curious glance lingered for a heartbeat before she disappeared behind a tent. Evelyn sipped the water slowly, the taste of dust still in her mouth. She felt every inch of her captivity, her tangled hair, torn dress, the ache of exhaustion, but also something new, something she couldn't name. A crack in the wall between fear and fascination. Taza appeared as the sun climbed over the canyon's edge. His shadow fell long and silent across the sand. He carried no weapon this time, only a small leather pouch slung over his shoulder. When she looked up, his eyes met hers briefly before turning toward the open desert. "You will ride with me today," he said. Evelyn stiffened. "Why?" "There is water to find, and eyes in the hills that should not see our camp." She rose unsteadily. "And if I refuse?" He looked at her then, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Then you will walk." The journey began under a pale morning sky. They rode side by side in wary silence through winding trails and dry washes, the earth cracked and red beneath their horses' hooves. Evelyn's wrists were no longer bound, but the freedom felt hollow, an illusion held together by Taza's quiet vigilance. After hours of riding, they stopped near a cluster of rocks where a thin stream whispered from beneath a stone. Taza knelt, filling a skin with water, his movements deliberate and graceful. Evelyn watched him, the desert wind tugging at her hair. Finally, she spoke. Why didn't you kill me that night? He didn't look up. Because I am not a killer of women. But you've killed, she said softly. He paused, the water skin half full. I have killed to protect my people, to keep the white soldiers from burning our children in their sleep. His gaze lifted to hers, sharp and steady. You speak of killing as though it were choice. It is not. It is survival. Evelyn felt the sting of his words. And what am I then? Your prisoner or your proof that you're merciful? Taza stood, closing the water skin. You are both, he said simply, and neither. The silence that followed was thick with everything they didn't understand about each other. Evelyn turned away, blinking against the sun. When they rode back toward camp, the wind carried with it the faint scent of rain, rare, precious, almost unreal. She could feel the distance between them shift imperceptibly. That night by the fire she avoided his eyes, but when he passed near her offering a piece of roasted corn, their fingers brushed. Just a moment, brief, electric, unintentional, neither spoke. Yet the air between them was no longer just fear and resentment. It was something else entirely, something dangerous and alive. And when she finally lay down beneath the stars, she whispered into the dark, as if the desert itself might hear. Whatever this is, it will destroy us both. The next dawn came restless and gray. A thin mist clung to the red canyon, softening the edges of the world. Evelyn awoke to the sound of horses being saddled, voices murmuring low and tense. The Apache were preparing to move. Taza was already mounted, giving quiet orders to the others. His posture was straight, commanding, his gaze scanning the horizon as though he could feel danger in the wind. When he saw her standing by the ashes of last night's fire, he gestured for her to come. We leave now, he said. Why? Evelyn asked, glancing at the weary faces of the people around them. Children were being bundled onto ponies. The elderly leaned on one another for strength. You just arrived here. Soldiers, he said. They follow. The smoke of our fires carries far. Her stomach tightened. They'll kill you all. Taza's eyes flicked toward her, calm, resigned. They will try. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before moving to help. Her instincts as a settler's daughter returned. Gather, pack, move fast. She joined the women who regarded her with wary curiosity, but made no effort to stop her. Together they tied bundles, loaded hides, and baskets onto horses. A young mother struggled with a crying infant, and without thinking, Evelyn reached out to steady the cradleboard. The mother blinked, surprised but nodded in thanks. For the first time since her capture, Evelyn felt something like belonging. Fragile, uncertain but real. By mid-morning, the band was on the move. A line of riders and pack horses winding through the rocky maze of the desert. The sun burned high and the air shimmered with heat. Evelyn rode behind Taza, watching the dust swirl around his shoulders. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the soft drumming of hooves and the distant cry of a hawk. As the terrain grew rougher, she noticed the weariness etched into every face, the hollow eyes of children, the gaunt elders struggling to keep pace. This was not a war party. It was a people trying to survive. They paused at midday beneath a stand of twisted junipers. Taza dismounted, scanning the horizon. We rest here, he said, and the group settled into the sparse shade. Evelyn sank to the ground, her legs aching, her mouth dry. Taza brought her a skin of water. She took it hesitantly, her fingers brushing his as she drank. Why do you let me live like this? She asked when she lowered it. Your people look at me as if I don't belong. And you... She stopped herself, unsure what she meant to say. He knelt beside her. You are a bridge, he said. A bridge? Between worlds that only know how to destroy each other. She gave a small, bitter laugh. Bridges burn, Taza. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. Only if the fire is stronger than the will to cross. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a fragile, dangerous understanding. As the sun sank low, painting the rocks in crimson, the column moved again. The path grew narrow, winding through jagged cliffs that rose like ancient sentinels. Taza rode ahead, scanning for danger. Evelyn watched him move with an ease that came from a life lived in constant motion. He seemed part of the desert itself, enduring, fierce, and heartbreakingly alone. When night fell, they made camp near a dry riverbed. The fires were small, hidden from sight. Evelyn tended to the wounded with strips of cloth torn from her dress. A boy with a deep gash on his arm winced as she cleaned the wound, but Taza's quiet nod of approval steadied her. Later, when the camp grew still, she found herself standing apart beneath a spill of stars. The desert stretched endlessly, wild and solemn. She had once thought it empty. Now she saw it was full of life, full of stories she would never have known if not for him. Taza appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. "You helped today," he said. "So did they," she replied softly. "They trusted me," he nodded. "Trust is the first step toward peace." She looked at him then, truly looked, the strong lines of his face, the weariness in his eyes. "And what's the second step?" His gaze lingered on her a moment before turning to the stars. Survival. For a long while they stood side by side in silence, listening to the desert breathe. Neither belonged to the other's world. But for that night, beneath that vast, merciless sky, the distance between them felt just a little smaller. The moon rose pale and cold over the desert that night, spilling silver across the jagged cliffs and winding canyon trails. Evelyn lay awake on her blanket, listening to the soft sounds of the Apache camp. The fire flickered low, shadows stretching long over the sleeping bodies of children and elders. Despite the exhaustion from the day's march, sleep eluded her. Taza moved silently through the camp, checking the watches and adjusting the positions of the horses. Evelyn had grown accustomed to his presence, always near, always observant. But tonight something in the quiet drew her toward him. Carefully she rose and followed, keeping to the shadows. He stopped at the edge of the canyon, gazing at the stars mirrored in the thin ribbon of water below. The riverbed shimmered faintly, a silver thread in the darkness. Evelyn hesitated, then stepped closer. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice soft but carrying authority. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Neither could you, it seems." Taza studied her for a long moment, then gestured for her to sit on a flat rock beside him. The air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of sage and desert dust. He was silent at first, watching the river. Then slowly he began to speak. "Do you see this scar?" He pulled back the sleeve of his shirt, revealing a deep, jagged line running from his chest to his shoulder. The skin was pale against the bronze of his arm, raised and uneven, a testament to old pain. Evelyn's fingers itched to touch it, but she restrained herself. "What happened?" she asked. "My brother," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "He betrayed our people. He led the soldiers to our village. My father, my mother, they burned. My people starved. I survived." "He did not." "And I carry the memory of that night in this scar." She blinked, overwhelmed. She had thought she had seen tragedy, but the weight of his loss pressed against her chest like a stone. She reached out impulsively, resting a hand lightly on his arm. I'm sorry," he did not flinch. "There is nothing to apologize for. We all carry our scars." The silence that followed was thick yet comforting in its honesty. Evelyn realized that beneath the warrior's fierce exterior was a man shaped by grief, by responsibility, by battles she could scarcely imagine. He had fought not for glory, not for pride, but for survival, for the survival of his people. "Do you hate all white men?" she asked cautiously. He shook his head. "No, I hate the violence that comes with them. That is all. You are not them." His gaze met hers, dark and steady. "And you do not lie about your fear." Evelyn's lips pressed together. She wanted to tell him she had not meant her words the night of the kiss, that they had been defiance, not desire. But the truth was more complicated. Fear and fascination, danger and longing, they had fused into something she could not untangle. Taza's eyes softened slightly, and he leaned back against the rock. "The desert teaches you many things," he said quietly. "It teaches who you are. It teaches who you can trust. And it teaches that even in silence, some truths will find a way to speak." Evelyn swallowed hard. "And what truths speak to you, Taza?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the river, letting the moonlight trace the planes of his face. Finally, he said, "That life is fragile, that loyalty is sacred, and that sometimes even a stranger can touch your heart." Her pulse quickened, but she remained still. A wind stirred the canyon, rustling the leaves of the juniper trees. For a moment, the world felt suspended between danger and beauty, between fear and something infinitely more human. Evelyn realized that she had begun to see him not as a captor, but as a man whose scars mirrored her own, though they had been carved by different battles. In the cold moonlight, she could see his loneliness, his grief, his honor, and against her better judgment, she could feel the pull of something that had begun the night of that first kiss, a dangerous, fragile, undeniable connection. They sat together beneath the moon, two souls bound by the desert, by loss, and by the unspoken truth that neither of them had fully named. And for the first time, Evelyn wondered if survival might mean more than mere escape. The morning light was pale and fragile, seeping slowly into the canyon like a promise that the night's shadows had no hold over. Evelyn awoke to the sound of low murmurs and the faint clatter of hooves. The Apache were already on the move, a winding thread of figures and animals tracing through the red rock. Taza had been awake long before her, scanning the horizon as though danger waited in every dust swirl. The tension in the camp was taut, almost unbearable. Rumors of soldiers closing in had spread among the warriors, and even the children sensed the unease. Evelyn felt her chest tighten with a mixture of fear and determination. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of survival here, to the sharp edges of this world, but today felt different. Something in the wind told her that a choice would come, one she could not evade. Taza approached her as she mounted her horse, his eyes steady on hers. "They will find us soon," he said, voice low but firm. "You will have a chance to leave." Evelyn's heart lurched. "Leave?" she echoed, fear and hope mingling in her chest. "And if I do? Your people are waiting for you," he said, his gaze drifting briefly toward the distant ridges where the soldiers might appear. "You could ride with them now and you would be safe." She swallowed, her throat dry. Safety. That word had once meant the world to her. Now it felt hollow. She thought of the camp, the children, the elders, the warriors who had grown accustomed to her presence, if only reluctantly. And then she thought of Taza, his strength, his scars, the quiet honor that had carried them through countless dangers. She began, but the words faltered. How could she explain that fear and fascination, danger and longing, had fused into something she could not name, that she had come to care for the man who had captured her, and yet perhaps had saved her in ways she could not understand? Taza waited patiently, giving her space, though the tension in his posture betrayed the stakes. "You must choose," he said finally. "Now is your chance." Evelyn drew a deep breath, trying to silence the whirlwind of doubt and desire. She thought of the soldiers, of the possibility of freedom, of returning to a life that was in every way foreign to her now, and yet she could not. The thought of leaving him, leaving them all, left a hollow ache in her chest. I stay," she whispered, the words trembling on her lips. Taza's eyes softened, briefly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. Enough for her to know that her choice had shifted the balance of both their worlds. "Then you must trust me," he said. "No one leaves this desert without the will to survive." She nodded, swallowing hard. Trust. She had learned a new meaning for the word here. Not blind faith, but a recognition that survival was woven from bonds stronger than fear, and though it terrified her to admit it, she had begun to trust him. The warrior who had once seemed like a stranger, then a captor, and now something far more. The camp moved on, weaving through the labyrinth of cliffs and dry washes. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of the wind through the scrub set her pulse racing. Soldiers might appear at any moment, yet her fear was tempered by something else, a fierce determination to stay, to fight alongside these people she had come to know, to face whatever came with the man she had chosen. As the sun climbed high, casting the desert in brilliant gold and crimson, Taza rode beside her. For a brief moment their hands brushed. She did not pull away. The contact was fleeting, electric, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them in the crucible of danger and shared survival. Evelyn's choice had been made. She would not run. She would not abandon the man who had once held her fate in his hands, and though she could not yet name the full truth of her feelings, she understood one thing clearly. In this harsh, unforgiving land, love and loyalty were as much a matter of survival as courage and skill. The canyon stretched ahead, wide and unknowable. The desert winds whispered of coming battles, of risks that could tear them apart, of choices that could not be undone. Evelyn tightened her grip on the reins and met Taza's gaze, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time since her capture, she felt alive in a way that fear alone could not define. The dawn broke jagged and red over Red Canyon, painting the cliffs in fire and shadow. Evelyn had barely slept. The tension in the camp was thick enough to taste, each whisper and footstep echoing against the rocky walls. Scouts had spotted soldiers approaching, and the Apache warriors moved with the precision of those who had survived too many battles. Taza rode at the head of the group, his eyes scanning the horizon, muscles coiled like a panther ready to strike. Evelyn rode close behind, heart hammering, hands clutching the reins until her knuckles whitened. Her body was tense, but her mind was sharper than she had ever known it. Every sense alive, every instinct screaming warning. The first gunshot shattered the fragile morning calm. The soldiers had come sooner than expected, advancing from the ridge with rifles raised. Dust rose in curling columns around them as they charged, their uniforms bright against the muted desert colors. Taza barked orders in Apache, and the warriors fanned out, taking cover behind rocks and ridges. Evelyn's horse stumbled, throwing her forward, but she caught herself, her body moving on instinct. She realized in that instant how deeply she had learned to survive alongside these people. The battle erupted with brutal chaos. Bullets tore through the air, kicking up sand and rock. Warriors screamed war cries and the soldiers returned fire, their voices harsh and unforgiving. Evelyn ducked behind a boulder, watching as Taza leapt from cover to cover, his rifle striking true. His movements fluid and deadly, she couldn't look away, even as a soldier advanced toward the children hiding near the camp's edge. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen branch, swung and knocked the man off balance long enough for Taza to intercept him. The warrior moved like lightning, disarming the soldier and driving him back. Evelyn's heart pounded. Fear and adrenaline coursed through her veins, yet beneath it all was a fierce growing resolve. Taza was wounded in the shoulder, a sharp cry escaping his lips as a bullet grazed him. Evelyn froze, panic flaring. Without hesitating, she ran to him, her dress catching on rocks, dust coating her skin. She pressed her hands against the wound, applying pressure. "Stay still," she urged, her voice trembling. "You'll be fine. You have to be." He shook his head slightly, wincing. "No time. You must—" "I won't leave you," she said, cutting him off. "Not now, not ever." The battle raged around them. Smoke curled through the canyon, mixing with the acrid scent of gunpowder and blood. Warriors fell, soldiers fell, and through it all, Evelyn worked with the desperate skill she had learned, binding wounds, moving the injured to cover, offering water when hands shook too much to hold it. At last, as the sun climbed higher, the soldiers began to retreat, their lines breaking under the relentless defense of the Apache. The canyon grew quiet, save for the ragged breathing of the survivors and the occasional groan of the wounded. Evelyn sank to the ground beside Taza, brushing dust and blood from his face. "You," he gasped, gripping her wrist. "You risked yourself." "I couldn't let them take you," she said softly. "I couldn't let anyone take you." His gaze held hers, dark and intense, and for a moment the world outside the canyon, the soldiers, the desert, the endless violence, seemed to disappear. All that remained was the bond forged in fire and fear, in defiance and survival. "You have kissed death itself," he murmured, a faint trace of a smile breaking through the pain. Evelyn shivered, not from the chill of the canyon but from the truth in his words. She had faced death alongside him, and in doing so, she had found the courage to embrace a connection that was far more dangerous and far more alive than anything she had known before. The battle was over, but the desert had not finished testing them. Blood and dust clung to their skin, and the canyon seemed to watch silently, waiting for the next challenge. Yet in that fleeting calm, Evelyn and Taza allowed themselves a single truth. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The canyon was quiet in the aftermath of the battle, but the air was heavy with smoke, sweat, and the scent of scorched earth. The Apache warriors moved slowly among the wounded, checking each child, elder and fighter with meticulous care. Evelyn had not left Taza's side since the fight had ended. His shoulder was wrapped, the wound tending to slow the bleeding. But his grimace lingered with each movement. The soldiers had retreated, their threat temporarily broken, but Evelyn knew the danger was not gone. Even as she helped a boy who had been scraped by falling debris, she could feel the eyes of men she would never see bearing down on the camp, soldiers looking for retribution, for revenge, for the captured girl who had survived the desert alongside warriors who refused to die. Taza mounted his horse and rode slowly along the perimeter, his dark eyes sweeping the horizon. He returned to her side, voice low, almost unreadable. "You must leave, Evelyn. The army will return and they will not show mercy." Her heart clenched. "And you? Your people? Your home?" He shook his head. "We will survive. But you—" He looked at her with a mix of warning and longing. "You have a chance to return to your world." Evelyn's hands tightened on the reins. The soldier's threat was real, yet a different fear gnawed at her. Leaving him. Leaving the desert that had shaped her in ways she had never expected. She looked at Taza, at the scarred man who had once held her life in his hands, now standing as both protector and companion, and she knew she could not walk away. "I will not leave," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. He studied her for a long moment, eyes dark and unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "Then you are mine to protect," he said, almost as if he were claiming her for both safety and defiance. The days that followed were tense, a delicate dance of survival. The Apache moved deeper into the desert, beyond the reach of soldiers, into hidden canyons and secret waterholes. Evelyn learned their ways, tracking, hunting, gathering. She tended the sick and wounded, mended clothes, and spoke what little Apache she had learned. The tribe began to accept her, wary but respectful. Even Taza's attitude shifted subtly. He no longer spoke to her solely as a captor or protector. Their conversations carried an unspoken understanding, a bond forged in danger and endurance. When he touched her hand, it was no longer a command, it was acknowledgement. When he shared stories of his brother and his past, it was no longer guarded, it was trust. Years later, legends would whisper of a white woman who rode with the Apaches, who knew the desert as only the people of the land could know it. Some would say she had died among them, lost to the sands. Others would claim she had lived, becoming one with the canyon and the warrior who had once captured her. Evelyn and Taza lived among the tribe, their bond unspoken but undeniable, a bridge between worlds that otherwise could not touch. She carried memories of her past, but the desert shaped her, tempered her, and made her whole in ways her old life never could. The canyon winds often carried the echoes of the past, whispers of battles, of cries and laughter, of moments when life and death had danced together, and sometimes when the night was still and the fire flickered low, the soft, daring words she had once spoken returned to her lips. "If you're going to kill me, kiss me first." The words had been a challenge, a defiance, a spark. They had sparked a fire neither of them could have foreseen, a bond that endured beyond fear, beyond danger, beyond life itself. And though the world would call it legend, to Evelyn and Taza it was simply the truth of survival, love and the quiet, relentless courage of the human heart. The desert, unchanging and eternal, held them both in its red, endless embrace. The desert was quiet that evening, as if holding its breath. The sun had dipped behind the cliffs, leaving the canyon bathed in violet and gold. The wind whispered over the rocks, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Evelyn stood near the edge of a high plateau, her hair catching the last light, her eyes fixed on the endless expanse of red sand and jagged cliffs. Taza approached silently, as he always did, his shadow long across the rocks. His face was calm, but Evelyn could see the faint lines of age and exhaustion etched around his eyes. Scars not of battle, but of responsibility, survival and love she could never have imagined. "You look far away," he said quietly, stopping beside her. "I'm thinking," she replied, her voice soft, "of the past, of the battles, of everything we've survived." He said nothing at first. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time since the desert had swallowed their old lives. The silence between them carried weight, years of fear, of danger, of stolen moments, and of shared truths. Finally, he spoke. "We are still here," he said. "After all they said, after all that has tried to break us, we are still here." Evelyn turned to him. "I never thought I would survive this place. Not like this. And yet," her voice faltered, "I would not trade it. Not the people, not the desert, not you." His hand reached for hers. She did not flinch. She felt the rough calluses of a warrior's life, the heat of his skin, the strength of a man who had once held her life in his hands and had chosen to protect her instead of destroy her. "You have changed me," he said, his voice low and earnest. "In ways I did not think were possible. You have made this life, More than survival. You have made it worth everything. Evelyn's heart thundered. Words failed her, as they always did when he was near. All she could do was lean closer, close the distance that the years and dangers had allowed but never erased. And then, in the quiet of the desert, under a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the world, she kissed him. It was not the reckless kiss of defiance from the night of her capture. This was a kiss tempered by fire and blood, by loss and survival, by trust and devotion. It was a kiss that spoke of years of hardships endured together, of battles faced, of loyalty and love that neither had expected, but both had nurtured in the shadows of the canyon. When they pulled back, Taza's eyes glimmered with emotion, a rare vulnerability, a hint of wonder and a quiet awe at the woman who had refused to bow, who had chosen to stay and who had become part of this land and its people. "Then we are alive," he whispered. "And this," he gestured to the desert stretching endlessly around them, to the firelight still flickering in the distant camp, to the silence that held all their memories. "This is ours." Evelyn smiled, resting her forehead against his. "Ours," she echoed. The wind carried their words across the canyon, through the rocks and the shadows, as if the desert itself had heard their vow. The past, the battles, the soldiers, the fear, had faded into legend, leaving only the truth of their survival. Long after, when travelers would speak of the Red Canyon and the pale desert moon, whispers of a white woman and a scarred warrior would mingle with the wind. Some would call it myth, others a legend, but Evelyn and Taza knew it was far more simple. A life shared, a bond forged in fire, and a love that had begun with the bravest words she had ever spoken. "If you're going to kill me, kiss me first," she had said. And now, the last kiss sealed their story. Not as captor and captive, not as strangers, but as two souls who had faced death and desert together, who had discovered in each other the strength to survive and the courage to love. The desert held them in its red, eternal embrace, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt completely, utterly alive.